I would like to preface this by saying I am not a accredited game reviewer, video essayist, or anyone important. I am just someone who's interested in the game and its story. Without further ado, let's begin. The writer,
Andrei Sapkowski,
was an everyday nobody with a love for literature, and in 1985 he submitted a short story of 30 pages, titled
Wiedźmin,
to a Polish science fiction magazine. He placed third, but was encouraged by the demand from others to continue his work. 6 other novels followed, all contributing to the growing popularity of the series in Eastern Europe. After a comic book series, a movie, and a TV show, not the Netflix one, a now defunct studio known as Metropolis Software attempted to create a Witcher game, but unfortunately, it got cancelled. A few years later, in 2003, CD Projekt Red, a very new studio having only been known for localizing games like Ace Ventura and Baldur's Gate for Polish audiences, negotiated with to make the game Metropolis Software were unable to. In 2007 they released The Witcher, a game with strong roleplay mechanics and some rickety mid-2007s bugs and gameplay quirks. It set a solid foundation for the series, and sold 1 million copies by the next year. A long-awaited follow-up was released in 2011, featuring much stronger combat and an even more engaging plot. While not a huge game by today's standards, it was still quite a statement to the rest of the single-player RPG landscape. CD Projekt Red were gaining a lot of steam, and very quickly. After selling 8 million copies in the 3 years following its release, eyes were certainly on CD Projekt to produce something extraordinary for their next game. In 2015, The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt was released. Applauded from day one by fans and critics alike, it set a precedent for all games in its genre. It had some of the biggest, most awe-inspiring environments in the gaming world had ever seen, and built even further upon the fantastic dialogue, narrative, and combat the previous games had evolved. If anyone has played The Witcher 3, it is, at the very least, in their top 5 video games they've ever played without a question. Ask anyone about it, and they will give you hundreds of reasons why you, yes you, should play it right now if you haven't. The title was a revelation, and one that fans wouldn't forget anytime soon. And it definitely got a lot of fans head over heels for what they had in store next. I think it's fair to say Cyberpunk was the most anticipated game to be released since probably GTA 5, which if you didn't know is the second best selling video game of all time. Announced in early 2012 and initially teased in January of 2013, before Witcher 3 even released, people were excited to see what the growing studio could create. But it would take a while before we actually got to see what the game was. After the initial teaser trailer and some concept art, we didn't get to see much of the IP in 2013. Following that was an excruciating 4-year period from 2014 till the end of 2017, where we got no updates, no tweets, and no blog posts. Complete radio silence. People had assumed the project had fallen into development hell, and the devs were instead focusing on the extreme success of The Witcher 3. On January 10th, 2018, with the game thought to be long gone, we received this from CD Projekt Red. And then, at E3 2018, we got this.
Can't deny it, it's all true. But everybody still wants to live here.
Jaw-dropping graphical quality. Futures have done in a way rarely seen in modern video games. Robot bodyguards, in-depth character customization, and a gorgeous open world. Select reviewers and industry bigwigs were taken to an off-show gameplay reveal, and all that we were told was this was going to be monumental. That's what we were promised. No release date, no other announcements. Just that this was going to be a landmark for the games industry. Precisely a year later, at E3 2019, we received another trailer, this time showcasing a bit more gameplay, as well as some story moments, including completely spoiling the prologue. Then, as we all know, they brought out Keanu Reeves, who was going to be playing Johnny Silverhand, and the internet went crazy.
Please welcome Keanu Reeves.
Following 2019's E3, everyone was hyped out of the central processors, and interest in the game could not have been higher. The Cyberpunk Twitter handle gained over 125,000 followers on each trailer release, and got millions of views every day after the E3 2019 trailer dropped. Following the cancellation of E3 2020, we received a few more trailers showcasing more gameplay and telling us a bit more about how the game would work and the RPG elements it contained. Delays followed the original release date of April 2020, and it was pushed all the way back to December. Customers were obviously annoyed, but not many got completely disenfranchised with the game, as the promised release looked to be more than anyone could dream, and people were happy waiting if it meant the game could be completed. How would the gameplay feel? How big was the open world? Who were the characters? What was Cyberpunk 2077? All those questions could only be answered on 10 December 2020. To put it bluntly, Cyberpunk 2077's release was an absolute shit show. Early copies were given to some reviewers, but they were all put under heavy embargoes, and every reviewer had to sign an NDA and were only allowed to release specific pieces of footage. Needless to say, this was not a good sign. And then, the apocalypse. According to other people, 10 December 2020. The game was buggy as fuck, and I've included some videos to show you just how broken it was on launch. In addition to that, the Xbox One and PS4 versions, where most customers had bought it, were nearly unplayable, with frame rates in the low 20s and even 10s. After that followed a written apology, large-scale refunding programs, and even lawsuits from investors. What had promised to be the biggest game since GTA 5 was actually a shallow, broken product. On launch, the game had 830,000 concurrent players on Steam, a number which dropped to barely above 20,000 by early 2021. It was a release hated by critics and fans alike, and little praise was given to any of its mechanics, as the technical problems were so encumbering. It is very obvious that the game was a failure, and even if the initial sales were around 13 million in 2020, not bad, but not good either, could save the company financially. A lot of goodwill was lost in the eyes of fans. After all, how could they get anyone excited for another game when Cyberpunk released this horribly? After many months of patches and bug fixes, I decided to try out the game for myself after deciding to not buy it on release. Here are a few of my thoughts, the good, the bad, and the disappointing. What exactly is Cyberpunk 2077? Well, it was slated to be a mega open-world blockbuster set in Night City, a metropolitan dystopia set in, you guessed it, 2077. A victim of rampant corporate capitalization and what I would like to call supercrime. The city is as cyberpunk as it gets. The game would follow V, an inhabitant of this diabolical paradise, on the quest to be written into the annals of its history. Whichever way the player wanted to do that. Intrigue, action, deception, all were going to be a part of this futurist odyssey, and everything is up to the player's choice. Well, that was how it was supposed to be. I'm going to start off with what I'm assuming is most people's favorite part of the game, and the only one that lived up to expectation. Night City is gorgeous. The neon lights, the buildings, the billboards. Everything is about as cyberpunk as it gets. As soon as it turns to night, it breathes into life. You can hear the hustle and bustle around you, and the advertisements playing in the distance advertising sex toys, or probably sex toys. Or NPCs aren't as variable or interesting as some might hope. You still get a ton of unique characters walking around the streets. Sometimes, while patrolling the streets, you'll hear some interesting conversation and get quite invested, and players can also accidentally stumble into quests by just listening to some people talking on a balcony. Like here, where I stumble into a story after overhearing some concerned people talk about their friend. Merchants usually have some personality to them, like this guy, who's just chilling on a street corner selling hoodies. In terms of size, I was actually surprised at how small it feels. While the open world is huge, I'm assuming due to already high technical requirements to run the game, they couldn't make the environment so big that it becomes impossible to render. What they do manage in this space, however, is to make every section feel different. Areas have quite a lot of personality, with different districts having different people, norms, and quest givers. As soon as you enter a district you haven't gone before, you get a call from the local fixer who usually has an interesting quirk or two. There's even one that appears when, spoilers, Jackie fucking dies, and you attend his funeral. And you can even ask him about jobs there, where he promptly responds,
"How are things in the streets?"
This is not the place to have some respect.
It's cool that you get to see how involved he is with the people of his area, and also adds to Jackie's likability, emphasizing the impact of his loss. Japantown is another place that you get to visit. It is filled with Japanese people, advertisements, and restaurants, and with the urban atmosphere of Night City itself, it passes quite well as a small, futuristic Tokyo. Following that, you have Pacifica, which is an area populated by ethnic Haitians, and reminds me of some oil-filled regions of our world. In addition, you have the city center, which is the epicenter of all the shady corporate business dealings that influence Cyberpunk's modern society, and so on and so on. If we're talking general open-world activities and tasks, they're kind of a mixed bag. While some can have cool stories objectives, a lot of the time it's just drug addicts who shoot you on sight and or shoot you and the police on sight. I never once really had the urge to just grind them out or even play them all that much. Night City is by far the most impressive open world to date, and it will take one hell of a game to topple its enormous scope. It lives and breathes, allowing the player to truly feel its secrets unravel around them. Combat in Cyberpunk is essentially split into two separate categories: fist/melee combat and gunplay. First up, melee combat. Now, the character I created wasn't exactly a sumo wrestler, so I didn't get involved in fisticuffs as much as some others might. Still, I tried out the street fighting questline, and I did use it once or twice in regular gameplay. The melee in Cyberpunk has all the essentials you would expect from a modern game of its type: light attacks, slightly heavier attacks that take longer to perform but do more damage, and directional block and parry systems. It feels a lot better than some other open world games of its type, like GTA 5, where you're just hitting air for the most part. However, nothing here really innovates or even improves on standard combat systems you'd find in most modern games. It is perfectly serviceable if that is the way you want to play, but it most certainly isn't a reason to want to play the game. Side note, the dodging in this game is awful. On mouse and keyboard it is set as double tapping directional keys, which, while you're frantically trying to land hits while staying out of range, is virtually the same as playing Getting Over It with Tourette's. Now, considering my character isn't the strongest in combat and I'm also a huge pussy, stealth was usually my go-to for any mission generally. Despite some questionable AI, the sneaking is actually pretty fun. Your bog standard crouch makes you go sneaky beaky like. Press a button behind enemies to incapacitate them, and you can move bodies and hide them to not alert further enemies to your position, a la Hitman. Now, to throw onto the slightly milquetoast stealth formula, you have hacking abilities. You can do some pretty cool stuff. Hack into cameras and see all the enemies in front of you. Hack into nearby vending machines and other electronic devices to distract them so they turn their back to you. Hell, you can even turn people's eyes off if your technical is high enough. Again, this is not a completely new avant-garde way of doing stealth. Just look at Watch Dogs and its sequels. But I would definitely class it as above average, and for me, the most fun you can find in this game. Onto the gunplay. I have a feeling this is going to be a mixed bag for a lot of people, and same for me. There's basic weapon variety with the types of gun you can use: pistols, SMGs, assault rifles, sniper rifles, basically everything you'd expect at this point. You also have smart guns, which if you didn't know, are basically auto-aiming weapons that in Cyberpunk basically means you just need to aim in the general vicinity of the hostile for a while and it'll work. In terms of guns specifically, there isn't a whole lot to talk about, which is disappointing. All guns within a class work essentially the same, just upgraded DPS, or damage per second if you believe in the judicial system, as you level up. It's not even on the same standard as games released years ago. There are very few unique aspects to guns, and with the cyberpunk technology-first theme the game provides, I found that slightly disheartening. What I feel is the most damning of all is that the gunplay isn't extremely satisfying. It is definitely serviceable, and likely won't ruin your personal experience, and some might even enjoy it, but I wouldn't describe it as a selling point. Audio is especially disappointing. Many weapons feel almost tinny and slippery. I feel that the main problem is TTK, or time to kill. For the most part, you will be fighting at moderate difficulty, and most enemies at moderate difficulty can take quite a few rifle rounds to take down. The slightly buffer enemies can even tank 2 sniper rifle headshot rounds. If the damage on guns was a bit higher, I think that the game would be less arcadey feeling in combat, and guns would pack the punch they're supposed to in this quasi-realistic shooter. After all, is the game not trying to sell you on a distinctly realized dystopian fantasy? Boss battles are hit and miss. Some are quite easy to kill, like here where I just dispense a few shotgun rounds to fix the problem. Or this one, when I genuinely felt like I was playing Dark Souls. Fuck you, Order. If you're going to try out Cyberpunk, I'd recommend sticking to shotguns and sniper rifles. They definitely feel the most impactful and work together at most ranges. Some revolvers and rifles can scratch that itch at various points, but their impact isn't always what I'd hope for. Overall, I'd give the combat in Cyberpunk a 6 out of 10. Not great, not terrible, serviceable, and, at times, very enjoyable. One of the main selling points of the game is the promise of being able to create your own character, be your own legend, make Night City yours. People were told the character creation would be more in depth than we've ever seen in a mainstream title, and that you could bend the story to your will, something also lacking from CD Projekt Red's other franchise. Let's start with the character creator, and if we're not being overly harsh, it is quite well done. It isn't as completely customizable as it was hyped to be. It's still mostly pick and choose from a selection box, but there are a lot of options for customization of all the aspects of V. If you're asking why mine kind of looks like Monica from Friends if she killed puppies, I'm not exactly sure, and I hope that isn't indicative of some Freudian complex that I have. The first thing you get asked after creating your appearance is what life path you want to choose, and you have 3 options: Nomad, Street Kid, or Corpo, or, in other words, Lone Wolf, Drug Addict, or Jeff Bezos. I chose Nomad. which, besides the beginning of the game and some dialogue, doesn't mean much. One of the most glaring problems with the RPG elements of Cyberpunk are the upgrades. While some aspects, especially in the technical tree, do change gameplay elements, most upgrades are largely just plus 5% accuracy with pistols while under 50% health. And if we are all being honest, that is awful. These sorts of tech trees only serve as mindless progression, and do not change how you play or feel about the game in any significant way. If you look at New Vegas, for example, the perks that you unlock have both positive and negative effects on your character, and thus shape the way that you play the game. Here there is no jeopardy, no real character specking besides making you slightly better at some things. This problem bleeds into others too, as they result in combat feeling much more restricted and one-dimensional than it could have been. Dialogue, while okay for the most part, is missing that critical edge that you get when you reward players with certain ways of speaking for creating a certain type of character. V doesn't feel like yours to control. V feels like a sassy, witty adrenaline junkie that you get to influence slightly. For a game that promised to make the player be able to become the character, it doesn't pass that test with flying colors. The other RPG mechanic that I felt was better off not being in the game is the loot-based weapon system. Instead of having a large variety of guns with completely unique mechanics and playstyles, or having a set number of guns that can be used in specific ways for specific engagements, Cyberpunk falls somewhere in the middle, where you do get a lot of different guns. Most are just slightly different presets of pistol, sniper rifle, SMG, etc. And all you are doing is tossing away old guns with low DPS for newer ones with better DPS. There's very little in the way of catering to make you able to shoot baddies how you want, with little to no modifications or upgrades possible to tweak your weapons how you want to. All in all, the RPG elements of Cyberpunk feel half-baked, and while I know that some of these choices are to fit with the ideas of the board game it is based on, these elements still need a lot of work. If any of what I have said so far has put you off the game, or you are teetering on the edge of wanting to purchase it, then hear this first.
To tell him what's brought you here. Maybe even over a cup of coffee.
My mistake. I hadn't planned on stopping. A failed coupling forced my hand.
Yeah, always some failure hiding mistakes. Name's Andrew Jones. Probably heard of me.
I can't say that I have.
Served in Spec Ops during the last war. Silver Shoguns? Ring any bells?
I can't say that it does.
The writing in this game is fantastic. I am very happy to report that the one universal thing CD Projekt are absolutely incapable of doing badly is superb once again.
Let me see. Ah, it's marked LOA. Perfect.
What's that mean?
Lost on arrival. Means the cargo was flagged as to be lost as soon as it crossed the border.
Oh, so they know we're smuggling.
Well, they're about to find out.
Almost every character you meet feels alive. The random characters you talk to on the street, vendors, quest givers, and narrative heavy hitters. Every person has their own personality, their own style, and their own story. While I might have problems with the player's involvement in dialogue, there's no shying away from the fact that the writing itself is great, emotional, witty, and at times thought-provoking. If there were any reason to buy this game, this would be it. Random stories you encounter by chance grip you from start to finish. This AI that controls an Uber service has lost control of some of its cars, and it's up to you to put a stop to them driving recklessly across the city. A bartender for the most legendary place of all cybercriminals leads you into the world of murderous street racing. After investigating the suspicious circumstances of the late mayor's death on behalf of a current mayoral candidate, you later help him as he struggles to understand an intrusion in his home that he can't remember. Oh, and that ends with you finding out that a major corporation has been completely fabricating his memories and controlling his life for months. The main story, while I feel weaker in quite a few areas than some of the side content, still is quite interesting and mostly keeps your interest for its duration. While it won't likely be the reason for anyone to return to the game after finishing it once, it still has some great moments and emotional choices, mostly towards the end of the game. Oh, and for all his complete dickheadedness, Johnny Silverhand is actually alright. At times you can feel he's overstaying his welcome, but his insults and brutish charm seem to become endearing as your playtime increases.
It's like kicking a puppy, a blind puppy.
You always freeze up like this?
Cyberpunk will get you to care about its people, its stories, and its city. There are very few games where you will get this level of complete fascination in the narratives and history of its world. The writing in Cyberpunk 2077 makes Night City feel alive, and because of that, so do you. Cyberpunk 2077 is a brilliantly flawed game. For every artistic landscape, for every intense narrative, there's an equally
Clouds
painful
doesn't need
RPG
bosses.
system or bug. If you went into this on the side of wanting to buy it, I'm of the opinion that you absolutely should. What Cyberpunk gets right, it gets really right. Very few games, if any at all, can deliver these sort of cutting-edge visuals and story in one. A few hiccups in development might dampen your experience slightly, but it pales in comparison to the escapism that Night City brings. If you were to purchase it now, as compared to on launch day, you will find much less bugs, as well as increased performance, at least on next-gen consoles and PC. I am very much looking forward to the DLCs releasing in the future, as well as any as well as any other CD projects in the future. I know they will have learned from this experience, and if so, their next game will be a true landmark.